the price which will decide the quantity and which will also decide the trend factor. Laspeyres price index, a very important one to see in terms of, so this is an index which is going to measure your price as well as your quantity factor. Why this matters to us in terms of averaging the relatives? How are you going to do that? It was actually trying to make you understand that how are your priorities changing. Good morning and welcome to the second session of Chapter 8, Index Numbers in Economics. Very interesting chapter, and we are going to continue today with the different kinds of index numbers and their weightage in terms of their applications also. As I have told you in the previous session, that the index number is actually the lifeline of any economy. We are also going to see today how the lifeline comes into picture by bringing in certain important index number values which will decide the price, which will decide the quantity, and which will also decide the trend factor in any economic sector altogether. So moving forward quickly, these are the topics that we are going to see today. Laspeyres price index, a very important one to see in terms of price index and also in terms of the index numbers. Method of averaging relatives, we had spoken about this in the previous session, so we're going to use it. And then we're going to talk about the weighted price relative index weight. Quite interesting, important, because we are going to see how a relative methodology matters in terms of commodity. Consumer price index, not to forget, that is what we are living and that is what we are meant for in terms, because every day we are the consumer, we are the people who deal with the price, we are the people who set the demand and supply. So consumer price index, more than saying important, it is mandatory, it is inbuilt by default, it is a part of the economy. And not to forget the index of industrial production. This is going to be the serious lifeline for any country's economy, because this is going to tell you how much are you producing, what is the production index, and how good is the manufacturing sector, which is one of the core part of any economy. So not wasting much of your time, let's move forward and try to understand each one of this index and their importance. Now this is what is going to be the Laspeyres index, and we are going to understand how it is going to work. The Laspeyres approach tries to say that the base period values will be assigned as weights to the items in the basket. Now let's try to understand. We have a price index here and we have a quantity index here. So this is an index which is going to measure your price as well as your quantity factor. So when you look here, Pn, Q0, P0 and Q0. So the new value, that is the current price and the base price with the quantity into 100. So the summation of P0, P1 or the P new into Q0, that's the base quantity, divided by P0, Q0 into 100 will give you the Laspeyres price index. This index is very, very important, because when you see here, this is the one using the base period quantities of weight. That is very, very important for us, because we want to know on which basis, on what line, on what measurement, on what value are we trying to understand the movement in the economy. So Laspeyres price index will tell you what is the movement happening altogether, how the movement is going on, and what basis the prices are being looked after. So this is where Laspeyres price index really matters, and it is of a great importance when it comes to economics. Moving forward, the method of average relatives. Why this matters to us in terms of averaging the relatives? How are you going to do that? When there is only one commodity, the price index is the ratio of the price of the commodity in the current period to that of the base period. That is what usually we have believed and expressed in percentage term. So for example, if the price of rice was 55 rupees in the year 2019 and the price of rice moved to 65 rupees in the year 2020. So then we are going to understand, being only one commodity, what is the relative pricing methodology? Why is the factor that is making it to move from 55 to 65 altogether? So that is normally what is happening here is that we are going to express it in terms of percentage altogether. So when we are going to express it as a percentage, we are going to understand how much is the change that is happening when compared to the base year to that of the previous year. This takes an average of these relatives. Now there are many average factors, there are many related factors altogether when we are talking about a commodity. So related to that particular product, related to that particular commodity, there might be factors, there are instances, there are factors on which we need to measure, on which we need to understand. So that is how it matters a lot when we are going to talk about the method of averaging. So you're not going to average. You are not just going to take one value, you're going to average out the entire commodity factor, and then you're going to decide how it is working, why it is working in that particular pattern. So this can be done not only for rice, this can be done for any commodity that is being traded across in our society. This value, this methodology will help us to understand on an average basis how it is moving out. Because many of the times or many of the products that we are going to understand, we do not know the exact value. We only go on a basis of an average. We believe that yes, this might be the price. We believe that this might be the value. So when we use this methodology, when we come to this kind of indexing altogether, you will be probably able to understand how exactly the averages are moving, on what basis compared to the previous year, the current year is making a trend altogether. Now moving forward, the weighted price related index number. The word shows quite an amount of words in terms of, it might appear to be complex, but then it's very, very easy. Why? Because in weighted price relative index, weights may be determined in proportion or in percentage. So when I use the word proportion or percentage, let's say 10%, 20%. So I'm using this thing in terms because in terms of the total expenditure. Now, if you look at a consumer in India, every month we tend to spend some X amount of rupees in terms of buying our daily grocery items. But we don't tend to spend the same amount of money on the same product every month. There is some change. This month I would have spent more money in terms of buying rice. Next month I might spend the same amount of money not on rice but on wheat. So now what is happening is that though my base total does not change, when I say the base total, let me say that 5,000 rupees I spend every month on my grocery. Now in that 5,000, I'm not going to change the total. The 5,000 remains as what it is. But I might change the proportion of rice, I might change the proportion of wheat, I might change the proportion of oil. So there are different factors on which I'm giving weightage or I'm giving importance. So that is where the weighted price relative index comes. Weighted. So you are giving a weightage to a particular commodity in relation to some other. So in relation to rice, what is the weightage of oil? In relation to wheat, what is the weightage to sugar? So the weighted price relative index is a factor that is going to measure your weightage, your component, your priority, your preference that you give to a particular product in relation to the another product or to the another commodity. So that is why this will matter a lot in terms of understanding it as an index value or as an index number. It can also refer to current period depending upon the formula used. But let's not getting into the formula, let's not get confused about this factor. It was actually trying to make you understand that how are your priorities changing over a period of time. The priorities will keep trying to change because you are not doing it simultaneously, you are not doing it in one shot or in one value. You are doing it because there are certain priorities for you. You want to refer back, you want to understand, you want to analyze. So automatically you will change your priorities, you will try to understand how we can alter our things so that our budget does not get disturbed. At the same time, I am getting satisfied with whatever I am purchasing. These are essentially, so I use that word essential very much. Why? Because without that factor, you will not be able to judge yourself. So these are essential factors in economy. Value that shares of different products in the total expenditure. So when I'm going to talk about the different products or different commodities, these are all the essentials. These are all things that will govern you on a day-to-day basis. Now, to give you a simple example here, suddenly the consumption of oil in your budget will start coming down once you think that I want to go on a fitness mode. The next month onwards, you will say that, sir, I will reduce my intake in terms of carbohydrates, intakes of oil and fat content because I am on a fitness mode. Moment you want to go on a fitness mode, the same essential oil will now become a lower priority for you in comparison to wheat or any other fiber product. That is because the same essentiality has now changed the priority altogether. So that's why this weighted price relative index will play an importance on a day-to-day basis. It tries to understand the mood swing of the consumer. It tries to understand what are the factors that will change every day on a day-to-day basis. Now, in general, the base period weight, that's also very, very important, is referred to the current year. Normally, we always keep the previous year as the base and the current year as the trend. So that is how we calculate the base period to that of the current year. It is because calculating the weight every year is inconvenient. We don't want to do it. Now suddenly somebody comes and asks you this question, what was your budget in the year 2010, 10 years back? You don't have an answer for it because we don't tend to keep our memory so much stretching or so much intact. So what we tend to do is that probably I can tell you what I spent last year or a couple of months back. That is understandable, that is quite humane altogether. But then if you are going to ask me how much did I spend 10 years back or 20 years back, I don't have an answer for it. So that is why it becomes very important for all of us, for most of us, to understand this factor that we need to do this exercise of calculating the weighted price relative index. Very, very common. That's more important for us. It also refers to the changing values, that is very, very important, of different baskets. Why? Because this is a very, very important factor, which I would say that because of the changing prices that tend to happen, you try to understand the changing values, you try to understand the different factors altogether. So this will matter to you, this will try to come to you in picture in the long run altogether. So you will need this weighted price relative index many a times to refer back and forth and try to understand the consumer spending pattern altogether. Now, moving forward, the consumer price index, the most interesting topic in economics ever to be spoken about, is the consumer price index. Who is the consumer? You are the consumer, I am the consumer, every single citizen who resides in this country is a consumer. So the consumer price index is all about you and me. There's going to be no different story at all there. So this consumer price index is definitely going to matter. It's definitely going to be of a high priority altogether, because this is known as the cost of the living index. Now, most of the countries, when you travel or when you try to come across, you will try to understand that the living cost, the living standards are higher or lower when compared to certain countries. Now, for example, the cost of living in India when compared to cost of living in UK is entirely different. Not just because of the currency fluctuation, it's because of the living standards are entirely different when compared to that of our home country. So that's where the consumer price index will try to tell you, at the particular rate what you are getting, the income what you are getting and the cost of living, are they matching? Suppose you are not able to match the income to the living standards, that means you are not being paid sufficiently, you will not be able to manage your necessities altogether. So the consumer price index will try to understand the average man, his income, with the conditions of living standards in India. So the government agencies in India prepare a large amount of consumer price indices altogether. They do it in various angles, in terms of labors, in terms of the general price, in terms of understanding the growth. All those factors will be there in terms of the CPI. So the government of India will involve on a day-to-day basis, and they plan out and they see how much is the factor. Now let's try to understand the consumer price index in terms of the industrial workers. The value of the index was 278 on May 2017. If you just go through this, the consumer price index numbers for the industrial workers with the base year 2001 was 100. So in the year 2001 it was 100, that was the industrial labor's work. But if you look in 2017, it has gone to 278. So just look at the numbers here, 10 or about 100. From there it sprung to 278. That's about like more than 100% jump that we are talking about. It's in fact more than 150% that we are talking about here. Similarly, All India Consumer Price Index for an agricultural laborer in the year 1986-87, again the base was 100, value in 2017 872, a mind-boggling jump, a huge jump that you can talk about. 100 in the year 86-87, that's about 25 years or about 35 years what we are talking about. And now from in the 35 years it has jumped up to 872 altogether, a big jump, a big number base altogether. Like this, if you see the rural labor, again it was 100 for the rural laborers in the year 87-88 time period when we are talking about in that time zone. Now it has gone to 878 in 2017. So if you look at this numbers itself, this will give you a lot of interesting factor. What was just 100, what was just a base, a denomination that we kept in our mind stating that that would be the value, has moved about like 8 times, 2.5 times or 8.7 times. All these indexes will definitely tell you that the rising price trend, the cost of labor, the cost of wages, the cost of production and the cost of agricultural index that has been happening in our great country. So index number is not just going to be a physical value. It's not just going to be a numerical value to just look upon, but that is going to be the value, that is going to be the factor that is going to tell you how the trend is being set. So consumer price index, a very, very important scale to measure. Now, moving forward, we're also going to talk about the industrial index of production. This is very, very important. Why? Because as you talk about a consumer, but who is going to satisfy the consumer's need? It is the producer. So production and producer are two important factors altogether. Until the producer is able to produce and give it up to the consumer will not be able to satisfy his demand. So that is why you look at this factor of consumer price index with the industrial labor production, that is your production factors, very, very closely. From the year April 2017, which has been fixed as a base year, we kept the base as 100 definitely. And then once we started looking, I mean it was actually in the year 2011 we had gone for this base year. In April 2017 the base year had gone up by at least by 7 times more, so it almost went up to 700 some change in terms of the base. Now when you start looking at the production factors, the cost involved, the land, labor, capital, everything matters a lot here. Why? Because every single factor that has been a matter in the economics will tell you how fast, how good we have been in terms of producing and in terms of going forward. So this concept of the labor growth, the labor psychology, the labor factors have definitely made us understand that, you know, over a period of time, it is the index number that has been throwing value to us, throwing the entire factor in terms of growth. So this industrial production is very, very important as a number that tells you how the production concept, how the manufacturing levels have gone up. Now if you see here, while the price indices were essentially weighted, similarly the industrial average, the production of a company, the production of particular factors, the production of particular units have also been measured in proportion to the consumption, in proportion to the growth. So this proportionality of the value and add growth is very, very important, because this will actually measure the economy in terms of consumption. And consumption is the primary driver for any economic situation to happen. Moving forward, the index in production also is available at the level of industrial sectors and subsectors. Very important. Why? Because if you look at the power sector, for example, there might be renewable energy, non-renewable energy. There are so many subsectors for every single core sector. So you can even drill down to the minute level possible and start understanding what has been the changes altogether. The main branches are mining, manufacturing and electricity. As I was trying to tell you, the energy sector is one of the biggest sector, one of the biggest consumption factors that happens in any economics altogether. So energy economics or the energy sector, that itself is one of the biggest in terms of the industrial production. So every year the government makes a sincere effort to understand what has been the production in mining, manufacturing and electricity. These are the three primary sectors where you can see the consumption going at a great average, at a great speed altogether. Similarly, we also try to focus on the core industrial sectors, which are like the natural gas, refineries, fertilizers, steel, not to forget coal, crude oil and all those factors, cement and all those things, because these are all the core driving factors of an economy. They are the people, they are the products, they are the sectors which will drive any part of the economy at any given point of time. Because today when you look at oil, when you look at fertilizers, when you look at coal or when you look at cement, these are all the driving factors for infrastructure or agriculture or energy to survive altogether. And these are all the sectors which will have production 24/7. They are not something which is like a seasonal business, but they are available all the seasons, all throughout the year. So there has been a lot of emphasis in terms of the industrial production indexes that have been going through in these sectors. So it is a matter of national importance when we try to understand the industrial index of production in these sectors. So there are 8 core industries which have been taken into the industrial index of production. So 8 core industries can be measured, can be analyzed, can be understood using this industrial index of production. Now, moving forward, we come to the conclusion for today's session. I hope and believe that this session was interesting, informative and educative. In the next session, we will see about Sensex, human index numbers, the development factors, and how index number will form a core part of the developing economy. Until then, stay tuned, stay blessed, and stay enlightened forever. Thank you once again for joining me on this wonderful session.